You've probably seen the headline. President Trump proposed sending $20 billion to Argentina to import more beef and lower prices for American families. Sounds good, right? Until you realize the ones who benefit the most aren't families or ranchers. It's the same global packers that are controlling the food system. And while RFK and the Baja movement are fighting for cleaner food and health-driven reform, this move really pushes in the opposite direction. Cheaper, lower quality beef that puts America's health and security second. So in today's video, I'm breaking down 5 reasons that this beef initiative is not what it seems and why putting America first has to start with putting our food first. Let's start with what matters most, the facts and the fix. So even if you only stay for a minute, you'll leave with value. Here's the facts. President Trump has proposed sending $20 billion to Argentina while opening the doors to move more imported beef. The claim is that lower grocery prices will help American families. And at the end of the day, this is not really a fix. It's truly, when you dig into it, more of a distraction. Because the truth is that the beef problem is not a supply issue at all. It's a control issue. And that control comes from the packers, the large companies, of which there are 4. These large companies control the price game from the beginning until the end. They have a direct impact over what ranchers get paid. They're also having an impact on what consumers pay at the store. They're governing those prices as well. And importing cheaper beef, well, quite frankly, all that really does is give them more leverage. And when you compare that against the RFK and the Make America Healthy Again movement, which is really driven towards cleaner food, higher standards, the way we should be thinking about our health, everything about this initiative, about this $20 billion to Argentina, flies in the face of that. It's going the opposite direction. You're creating more volume and less quality. So those are the facts, but what's the fix? Well, the fix on this is you really should source locally and stop playing the Packers game. And the only way you can stop playing the game that the Packers have set up, and that, frankly, many don't even realize that they're in, is to have a local source of food. So today, I want to break down clearly and simply 5 reasons Trump's beef initiative is not what it seems and what it really means for our food, our health, and our country. But before we get started, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Arland Hill, and I'm both a clinician and a rancher. And for more than 2 decades, I've helped patients rebuild their health through real food, while here at Harvest Hills Ranch, I raise food the way that it's meant to be raised. Nutrient-dense, pasture-finished, and transparent from soil to plate. So when I talk about food policy, I'm looking at it as how it affects the 2 most important things: human health and the integrity of our food supply. Reason number 1 that Trump's beef initiative is not what it seems is that it creates the illusion of price relief. It's an illusion. The administrative statement is that when they import this beef, that it will lower grocery prices and that it's a very linear connection. Well, as you can maybe just really, even looking from the outside in, get a good assumption that the food supply and the food chain is not that linear and it's not that straightforward. Foreign supply does not equal cheap steak. And one of the things that I think really helps put this into perspective is that when you look at every dollar that is spent on beef, only 15% of that dollar is actually reaching the rancher. And understand that that is down from 20% just a few years ago. So your rancher that's out there raising the beef that you're consuming is only making 15 cents out of every dollar that you spend. And that's information that is coming directly from the USDA. So what does that mean? Well, let's flip that statistic the other way, and it actually paints a much more vivid picture of what you're spending money on. Because 85% is spent on processing and retail. And when you think about that in regards to many of these companies, which I'll get to next, many of these companies that control this, that all fall under this umbrella of packers, they're geared towards consolidation and vertical integration, meaning quite simply that they want to control every aspect of the beef market as much as possible. And so that means that whether it comes down to what's taking place in a processing facility, the trucking to the facility, the feedlots, they actually control, many of them control the feedlots now. At the end of the day, it may look from the outside in that the rancher is asking a higher price for their beef, but quite frankly, it just doesn't work that way. It's really more about when it comes to the rancher, what the rancher is going to receive when they sell their cattle. So back to the imports, if the import price drops, quite frankly, consumers really aren't going to see that very much. And it's because the packers are controlling both ends of the spectrum. They're controlling how much are being paid for cattle, what they're purchasing cattle for, what they're willing to purchase cattle for. And because they can control, or because they do control so much of the market, they can drive those prices down. But on the other side, once they've gotten it through their system and now it's going to the retail stores, retail outlets, they control the price that it goes into the retail outlet for, and the retailer obviously has to make a profit on this, so inherently that's going to push the price up some. And so really the packers are the ones that are controlling this. And again, farmers, ranchers, they're not setting the prices here. And even you'll hear a lot of stuff about cattle scarcity and natural disasters and these kinds of things, but the truth of the matter is that those are truly concerns because we have what is considered a centralized system. You have a very few that are controlling things, and events like that are going to impact them at a much greater scale. Whereas if you look at a decentralized system, meaning that, let's say the opposite, you had multiple small packers that were regionally located across the country, in those scenarios, when something happens in one region of the country, it doesn't happen across the country. And that's really what the advantage of a decentralized system would be. So the point here is that this illusion of price relief is really one of the things that makes this Trump initiative about beef just not what it seems at all. Now, reason number 2 is going to continue to play off of this notion of control, and it comes to corporate control, and corporate control not being associated with consumer relief because it's a corporation, and the goal of a corporation is to make money, and they're going to do that at all costs, and they're going to continue to try to push that further higher and higher year over year and be able to their investors, their stockholders, they want to be able to illustrate to all those folks that they're making more and more money. When the U.S., there's 4 companies, and this is when I say the U.S., and you'll see why I'm pointing this out because these are not all U.S. companies, but in the United States, there's 4 companies, 4 packers that control the beef market. There's JBS, there's Tyson, there's Cargill, and National Beef. National Beef is actually also, their Marfridge is the parent company there, so you might see that sometimes, but JBS, Tyson, Cargill, National Beef, and they control about 85% of the U.S. beef processing. Well, 2 of these are foreign owned. Inherently, that right there tells you that we have a problem. And the 2 that are foreign owned are JBS and Marfridge. Again, Marfridge and National Beef being one and the same here. Marfridge owns National Beef. But they're based in Brazil and, wouldn't you know it, Argentina. So right there, we can see that there's an immediate conflict of interest here. And as these imports come in, they're coming in through the channels of these packers. So it doesn't weaken this system that I'm sharing with you here, this conglomeration of these 4 companies, if you will. It doesn't weaken their system. The only thing that it does at the end of the day is that it strengthens this. And these are the same corporations, remember, that are buying cattle from American ranchers, and they're going to profit from importing cheaper beef. If they can get that beef coming into their supply chain at a much lower rate, guess what they're going to do to the American rancher? they're going to stop paying them. They're not going to pay them top dollar or even a good dollar for what these cattle are worth and for what these ranchers and farmers are putting into these animals to try to get them to market. And this is, again, all a byproduct of this vertical integration where upstream they control what producers get paid for cattle. Downstream, they're controlling what that beef product enters the market at retailers and what consumers ultimately pay. And it becomes an internal profit loop for them where they squeeze the rancher, they charge the consumer more, and they still keep the margin on the cattle that they're looking for. And in fact, they probably drive that margin up. So when politicians are saying we're importing more beef to lower prices, it sounds good, but the reality is that it's not a well thought through process. And to the average person out there, the immediate thing that they see is that, yes, it's going to lower prices that I'm paying at the grocery store. But what you're not factoring into this is that you're giving more control to these packers. And at the end of the day, this is a manipulation of the system. It's a built-in conflict of interest. The other thing that this does is that it creates a cycle where more foreign cattle inventory enters the U.S. That lowers the demand for U.S. cattle, which is going to lower the prices to the ranchers in the U.S. And ultimately, they're not getting paid what they need to get paid, so they're going to drop their cattle inventory. And so that means that we end up with fewer U.S. cattle ultimately to sell. It's just a nasty cycle that's going to play out here that, again, just on this from looking at all of these things doesn't look like it's been well thought out in terms of what the long-term implications are going to be here. And with the current market as high as it is for cattle, it's really at the highest that it's been in a long time. Well, this market is like many other markets. It ebbs and flows. It has highs, it has lows. It's cyclic. So it's poised to come down at this time. So you couple this with a market that is inherently poised to come down. And you also add to that you're going to have an influx of Argentinian beef. And this is not looking good for U.S. cattle producers and the protection of your food supply, which is what's important for you as the consumer. It's not protecting your food supply long term. It's all going to contribute to a declining American herd. If you look at the total size of the American herd, all the cattle in the U.S., it's currently the smallest size that it's been since the early 1960s, and it's continuing in that trajectory. This is not ideal. This is not ultimately food security. Now, reason number 3 that I have for you here is that there's an emphasis on quantity over quality. Well, this becomes the norm when you're starting to just run numbers and you're just trying to put stuff into the market space out there. And every time policy focuses on more beef instead of better beef, which is what we should be focusing on here, the way that you would easily translate that is that you're just trading nutrition for volume. And I don't know if you guys have looked lately, but we have a epidemic in this country of poor health because that is ultimately what has happened. We've traded nutritional density for more calories. Yes, you can get calories everywhere you turn, but nutrient density, not so much. And you see what our overall state of health is across the country. So if you go back to this conversation, you think about it from an imported product, yes, it's going to meet the minimum safety standards. It's checking that box, but it still falls short nutritionally because ultimately you're just not putting the effort into raising these animals in a way where you're driving as much nutrient density in. In fact, what you're actually trying to do is just pack as many pounds on as you can per animal and really sell them on the pound. And the whole notion of selling on pound and making us think that we're getting something because we're paying X amount for pound, and it just ignores the whole nutrient conversation is just a mental barrage that we just don't even need to go down in this video because it just really steers us all in the wrong direction. But what it ultimately does is it rewards tonnage instead of quality. Well, all of us want quality. That I think if you're listening to this video and understand the nature of this channel, quality is at the forefront of what you're looking for. U.S. ranchers are raising superior animals and getting pushed out. It's we hear this narrative sometimes that these animals coming in from other countries are of better quality or better beef, and especially that conversation especially gets touted when you talk about grass-fed and grass-finished animals, and that's a whole other conversation too. But it just doesn't hold up when you really put it under the microscope here. So consumers are paying for this illusion of abundance with at the end of the day, what you're really getting is lower quality protein. So more beef doesn't translate to better beef or even cheaper beef long term, which is the other factor here, because that price point may look low now, but that doesn't mean that it's going to stay low. So importing low cost, lower quality beef, yeah, it's dropping the price point right now. But again, remember who's behind this. You've got those packers back there, and those packers are controlling the price points. So when you start undermining this domestic production, what's happening here in the U.S., the quality standards are going to ultimately be affected on that. You're going to see that the U.S. consumers are going to become left dependent on foreign countries to be able to supply our beef. And again, it may look like a short-term fix, but it's short-term. We need long-term fix. We need sovereignty of our food. We don't want to be dependent on other countries. We want to be able to stand on our own 2 feet where our food supply is concerned at. So quantity may feed people, but quality nourishes them, and the packer system doesn't reward quality. And the other thing that I haven't even factored into this conversation is country of origin labels, right? I'm not going to delve off into that topic because that would just take us on a whole other sidetrack, but that's something else you've got to factor in here. Now that we're going to have this influx of Argentinian beef, is that going to influence some of these country of origin labels? And I mean, there's been some recent changes on that in a positive direction, but frankly, not far enough. It needs to outright say where that product is coming from. And maybe I don't know if this is the biggest thing, but one thing that really stands out for me here is that this whole policy is a contraindication of what we've heard from this current Trump administration, right? And to be fair, I want to try to get both sides on this. President Trump has pledged to protect American ranchers and to deliver relief for everyday Americans, right? So, on the forefront right now, up front, it looks like that's what's happening. But the administration says it's doing both. And it just can't be doing both. If you're expanding imports for short-term price relief while rolling out a USDA initiative to rebuild herds for the long term, yeah, that's great. But I'm not seeing that included in this conversation at a high enough level. Like you really got to give the ranchers, the farmers, an avenue as to how that's going to happen and how you're going to create stability in the current U.S. agriculture market. And if you look at some of the previous trends, some of the previous examples where we can just ask, is there an example that we can lean into? Well, in fact, we have seen this pattern before and it didn't turn out so well here. So if you look at soybeans, and not necessarily an advocate for soybeans here, but just use it as a case example because we're a huge producer in the U.S. of soybeans. When the tariffs were on soybeans, it was supposed to help farmers. Well, what it has ended up doing is actually hurting them when the markets overseas started to shift. And there's very much the same reality that could happen when it comes to beef. And once these foreign supplies fill the gaps for whatever product the market is demanding, domestic producers, they're really just going to be squeezed out and they're going to lose their leverage. And once that happens, it is nearly impossible for them to be able to find their way back in and get a good foothold to make it a viable business for them again. And so while you look at this as, we have good intentions here. Well, good intentions aside, the structure of this plan, it still favors the packers and not the producers here. Now, reason number 5 that I have for you here, and the final reason, is that this is the America First contradiction. And food is national security, right? If you can't feed your people, you don't have a healthy populace, you don't have a productive populace. The populace can't do the work that it needs to do to keep the gross domestic product up. I mean, it's just a chain reaction of things that come from having a high quality food supply. And so for any administration to be claiming that they're prioritizing national security, which has been just the narrative from the outset, but yet you're turning around and outsourcing food production, that's fundamentally hypocritical. And if you can't control where your food comes from, then you can't control your nation's health, you can't control your economy, you can't create stability. It just becomes a domino effect that's going to have negative implications. So relying on foreign beef supply chains, it increases vulnerability. You're going to see that if trade disputes come up, that's going to affect it. Bottlenecks in the shipping, just right there, think back about COVID in the pandemic time frame. We saw that the resiliency in the U.S. food supply, it took a hit. A lot of that had to do with that whole centralized versus decentralized effect that I talked about earlier, where we have more of a centralized food system now. We need a decentralized food system. The pandemic brought a lot of that to light. And ultimately, this whole concept, and I've said this so many times, and it just really, I'm doing it to try to reiterate the point to you that strengthening the packers is not advantageous. These packers have no loyalty to American farmers, to American ranchers, and to you as the American consumer. And ultimately, what this whole thing does is that it entices the packers it entices them to decouple from U.S. producers, from American producers. And that's the opposite of what we want. We want them to really lean into developing that supply chain that is dependent on these American beef producers. And ultimately, that's what creates our food sovereignty, our food security that we're looking for. And it takes the risk away from the U.S. Now, the other thing I'll just say in passing here before I tell you the solutions in all of this and how you can actually work around everything I'm talking about here and not be a player to it, is that you look at RFK, you look at the Make America Healthy Again movement, and it calls for higher standards, it calls for cleaner food, and we've seen so many examples of that, and nearly all of these are moving in the right direction. I don't think, regardless of what political party you ascribe to, I don't see how you cannot get behind a cleaner food supply and less toxic exposure across the board. And this is, in terms of the food supply, this is going in the exact, this beef initiative from Trump is going in the exact opposite direction of the things that have been promoted and touted with the Make America Healthy Again. Even from a regenerative farming standpoint, regenerative ranching, RFK has been behind that. He's an ally to that movement. He appreciates that. And are these Argentinian farmers doing that? Is there a way to even validate that, even if the answer that we were given was yes? No, there's not. And so you've just got a complete contradiction that's coming to light here. Now, fortunately, there is a solution in all of this. So let me give you the solution. If the goal is truly to lower beef prices and protect consumers, well, there's a couple of things that need to happen. First, you need to break up these packers, break up the concentration of these packers. And that could easily be done by some antitrust enforcement. And this is, just to put this in another context, this is a multi-company monopoly is ultimately what we have right now. It shouldn't be a scenario where 4 companies control 85% of our beef, a major staple in the U.S. food supply. So the first is there needs to be some action to enforced under the antitrust regulations to break a lot of that up and decentralize this whole food system that we're talking about here. And that would lead you into rebuilding your regional processing infrastructure, which means that you would have shorter supply chains. You wouldn't have the cost of extensive travel and trucking built into the price you're paying at the grocery store or elsewhere. And ultimately, It reduces your costs and it maintains a local economy. Next thing that you can do is you can support regenerative independent ranchers like Harvest Hills Ranch that are producing nutrient-dense beef domestically. That's supplied. There are numerous ranches out there across the country that are doing great work, very much like what we're doing, and taking the time to create nutrient-dense food. And you need to find in your local area who's doing that and ultimately reward quality over volume. This is about getting the highest quality food in, not just shoving more calories through. So, and again, a lot of these systems are built on how fast can I get that cattle to market? How fast can I get their weight up? And what type of exogenous things, outside things do I have to give them to be able to accomplish that and to hit that tonnage, that poundage that we're looking for? And when you're focused on quality, those things just aren't even a conversation. I'm not going to give my animals growth stimulants just to try to meet a poundage requirement that they're looking for at the sell barn that I know a packer will pay for when I go to sell my cattle. It just doesn't make sense, and there's only going to be negative implications associated with that down the road. So this is really ultimately, when you're working with that local regenerative ranch, it all becomes about the quality of the product. And the next thing is that there needs to be education to the consumers between the difference of price and value. Don't get those two things confused. They're not the same thing. A low price does not mean a higher value. And so this is why high quality beef, yeah, it's going to cost a little bit more, but the value, the nutritional density, the transparency that you get from it, you're not getting that elsewhere. And that's what should be important to you if you're trying to optimize your health. So the next time that you hear that cheaper imported beef is the solution, remember, quality and sovereignty are never found in shortcuts. And this system isn't broken because of the rancher or because of you as the consumer wanting a better price point. It's broken because of who's controlling the middle of that supply chain. And if this video has helped you see the story behind the headlines, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who cares about where their food really comes from. And when you're ready to go deeper and look into what makes grass-fed beef truly different and why reading labels is not going to tell you the whole truth, well, go ahead and watch my next video, Grass-Fed Beef, What Dr. Berg Got Right and What to Do Instead of Reading Labels. That's where we take this conversation from policy to your plate.